Trump has modified reciprocal tariffs, including for Canada.
He has lashed out at Canada once again, imposing a new and extra 10% tariff on Canada.
I'm a tariff person. I've always been a tariff. It's simple, it's easy.
The moment Donald Trump publicly threatened to turn Canada into the 51st state, most analysts assumed the outcome was already decided. Tariffs were rising, political pressure was escalating, and history suggested Canada had nowhere else to go. But while Washington erupted with angry speeches and tweets, something extraordinary was happening thousands of miles away. Something American power didn't see and couldn't stop. Quietly, Canadian oil tankers were leaving the Pacific coast, not heading south toward the United States, but west, toward China, Singapore, and Hong Kong. This wasn't a protest. This wasn't symbolism. This was the beginning of the most dramatic economic reorientation in Canadian history. For more than 70 years, Canada lived under a single economic reality. Nearly 75% of Canadian exports flowed into the United States. Entire industries, energy, manufacturing, agriculture, were designed around one assumption: the American market would always remain open. That assumption didn't weaken, it collapsed. In early 2025, President Trump escalated his tariff campaign against Canada. First came a 25% tariff on most Canadian goods. By mid-year, that number rose to 35%. Then, in October, another 10% was added after a political dispute involving Ontario, bringing total tariffs to 45%. The strategy was straightforward: apply enough economic pressure and Canada would surrender at the negotiating table. Economic institutions like Oxford Economics warned that the damage could last for years, possibly permanently. Many analysts predicted deep scarring to Canada's economy. But Washington miscalculated one critical factor. Canada did not wait for Trump to change his mind. Instead of hoping for negotiations that might never come, Canada made a strategic decision: not to resist pressure, but to eliminate dependence. The turning point arrived quietly on May 1, 2024, when the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion officially went live. This project had one of the most controversial histories in Canadian infrastructure. Originally estimated at 5.4 billion Canadian dollars, the final cost reached 34.2 billion. The federal government purchased the project from Kinder Morgan in 2018, amid intense opposition from environmental groups, legal challenges, and political resistance, including obstruction during Trump's first term. But Canada pushed forward, and when the pipeline opened, the rules of the game changed overnight. Pipeline capacity surged from 300,000 barrels per day to 890,000 barrels per day. More importantly, the oil no longer had to flow south. For the first time in modern history, Canada had large-scale, direct access to Asian energy markets. Before this expansion, Canadian oil exports to Asia were practically zero. After it came online, crude oil exports through British Columbia increased more than six-fold. By September 2024, Canada was exporting 300,000 barrels per day to China, the highest level ever recorded. This happened while Trump was still threatening tariffs. By early 2025, the numbers became impossible to ignore. From January to April, Canadian oil exports to non-U.S. markets surged by 24.8% in March alone, one of the largest increases on record. At the same time, exports to the United States fell 6.6%, the steepest drop since the pandemic. And then something unexpected happened. In September 2025, Canada posted a $153 million trade surplus, its first since Trump's tariffs began. This wasn't coincidence, it was consequence. While Canada's trade numbers surprised economists, The political consequences shocked Washington. Despite tariffs, instability, and disruption, Canada's economy didn't collapse. Unemployment rose to a 9-year high but remained manageable. Manufacturing job losses totaled around 30,000, serious but far from catastrophic. Meanwhile, the United States lost over 60,000 manufacturing jobs in the same period, largely due to higher input costs and supply chain disruptions caused by its own tariff policies. The pressure meant to weaken Canada was now hurting America too. The impact extended beyond factories. Canadian travel to the United States dropped over 30% in 2025, hitting tourism-dependent states like Florida hard. American liquor exports to Canada plunged 85% as consumers boycotted U.S. products. Trust, not just trade, was breaking down. In March 2025, Mark Carney became Prime Minister. His response was decisive. Instead of prioritizing Washington, Carney traveled extensively to Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, signing preliminary trade frameworks and investment agreements. In fall 2025, he met directly with China's leadership to resolve outstanding trade disputes. Canada officially launched a trade diversification strategy focused on Asian markets, where demand for resources, agriculture, and manufactured goods was growing faster than in the United States. By October 2025, Carney publicly committed to doubling exports to non-U.S. markets. This was not temporary adaptation. This was permanent restructuring. Here's what Washington underestimated most. Trade infrastructure doesn't reverse. When oil producers sign long-term contracts with Asian refineries, when shipping routes are optimized for Pacific trade, when logistics networks and supply chains are rebuilt, those systems do not disappear when political leadership changes. Even if tariffs were removed tomorrow, Canada would not return to economic dependence. The exit routes have been built. By late 2025, the International Monetary Fund forecast Canada's GDP growth at 1.2%, ranking it second fastest in the G7, behind only the United States. For 2026, Canada again held second place. This growth happened despite tariffs, not because they were removed. Canada had proven it could survive without full access to the U.S. market. That changed everything. As the mandatory USMCA review approaches, Canada enters negotiations with leverage it has never possessed before. Instead of negotiating sector by sector, steel today, autos tomorrow, Ottawa is prepared to put everything on the table at once. Canadian officials have openly suggested they are willing to walk away if tariffs remain. For the first time in history, that threat is credible. Canada has demonstrated survival outside the agreement. This is the great irony of power. Trump's tariff strategy was designed to force Canada into submission. Instead, it forced Canada to build the infrastructure and relationships necessary to break free. When pressure becomes coercion, allies don't always comply. Sometimes they adapt and permanently reduce dependence. At the beginning of this story, Canada was treated as an economically captive neighbor. At the end, Canada stands more independent than at any point since World War II. North American power is rebalancing, and that shift cannot be undone. Even if future U.S. presidents attempt to restore old trade relationships, the reality has changed. Canada now has options, and options create power. If you want deep, fact-based documentary-style analysis on Canada's economy, geopolitics, and global strategy, subscribe to Depth Analysis of Canada, because surface-level headlines never tell the full story, and this transformation is only the beginning.